Widmers Cheese Cellars, located in Thru, Wisconsin, represents 3 generations of cheese-making excellence. Widmers carefully produces traditional handcrafted brick, cheddar, and Colby cheeses that have won awards in the United States and around the world. Company President Joe Widmer is one of just a handful of certified Wisconsin master cheesemakers in America. Joe's expertise and experience guarantee a great tasting cheese, whether it's picked up at the store or shipped to a customer. Widmers is happy to ship orders to anyone who wants to enjoy their high-quality cheeses. Now let's go straight to the source to learn more about Widmers Cheese Cellars.
I'm third-generation cheesemaker Joe Widmer, and my grandfather came over from Switzerland in 1905. About a 17 or 18-year-old guy came to America, and he had to have a job lined up before he came. His job ended up to be a job located about 10 miles from the location of this cheese factory as an apprentice learning how to make cheese. That was 1905. He stayed in contact with his girlfriend, and in 1911 she sent him a letter and said if he sailed over to America, would he pick her up in New York? So he went all the way back out to New York. The ship came in. About half the people who got off the ship, she was still up there. So he said, what's the deal? They said, well, these people have no quota, they have no visa, we're going to sail them back. He said, well, my girlfriend's on there, how can I get her off? They said, you'd have to marry her. So being a guy, he tried to reason with him. He said, I'll take her back to Wisconsin and marry her. They said, no, if you want her off that ship, you'll have to marry her here. So he married her on the dock. They honeymooned in New York for a week. They came back to Wisconsin, and they continued to make cheese. And in 1922, this cheese factory was for sale in thru, Wisconsin. He purchased it. My father was about 5 years old at that time. My Uncle Ralph was about 4. They'd be in their 90s now. And they remember walking through and looking at the plant for the first time. And Grandpa bought it. They moved upstairs. They learned the tradition of cheese making. And my father raised me and my 6 brothers and sisters above this factory as well. And that's where I learned the cheese making tradition. And me and my wife and 2 kids just moved out 5 years ago simply because we built a house. But the tradition of Wisconsin cheesemakers goes way back to the time when there was over a couple thousand cheese factories in the state, and the families lived above the cheese factory. After his decision to buy the plant, my grandfather had another big decision. What types of cheese am I going to make? He was surrounded by Germans, so he had to make something that Germans would eat. So what he started making in 1922 was brick cheese. Brick was invented in Wisconsin in the 1870s by another Swiss immigrant named John Yossi. It's a washed rind cheese, in fact, one of America's first washed rind cheeses. To make brick, this John Yossi would put the curds into a form and put an actual brick on top, giving it the name brick cheese. That and the shape of the cheese both gave it the name brick cheese. Our product here at Widmers of brick cheese is so traditional, we're still using the bricks my grandfather used in 1922 to press cheese. Another cheese he started making in 1922 was cheddar, because cheddar, as it is today, was also a universal cheese back there. Everybody liked it, and they knew there was always a market for cheddar also. Our family also started making Colby, which was invented in Colby, Wisconsin in the 1870s, and we still produce that cheese in a traditional manner. If you look on the building back here, we have the cantons of Switzerland. Just like the states have counties, Switzerland has cantons. My grandfather came from the canton of Bern, and my grandmother from St. Gallen. All our products are authentic and traditional, and we make them all the old-fashioned way, which we believe makes a much better cheese. And if you come inside now, I'll tell you more about the cheese-making process. As I had told you out in the production area, the brick cheese was pressed with the bricks for an hour and a half. Then a brick was taken off. They were covered overnight and allowed to ripen. And the next morning at 4:30 in the morning, while most of you were sleeping, this cheese was placed into these salt brines. This is the brick cheese. It's a 95% salt solution. What it does is give the cheese flavor, and it acts as a preservative. There's over 500 varieties of cheese in the world. When I say varieties, I mean brick, cheddar, Colby, Swiss, blue, but there's categories. Brick comes from a category known as surface ripened or washed rind, which means after it leaves this brine, it goes to a curing room with warm temperature and high humidity. Bacteria grows on the surface, and that's what creates the flavor throughout the piece of cheese. And we'll go into that room now. After spending 9 to 10 hours in the salt brine, the cheese is moved to the curing room I spoke of. This room holds a temperature of 70 degrees, 90% humidity. Now there's two types of brick we make in here. The original type, which was invented by John Jossi in 1870, the one I told you about outside. This one stays in here for a full week. The surface is washed with enzymes and bacteria every day, and at the end of that week, this cheese gets quite a bacterial growth on the surface. So we package this cheese in parchment paper to hold the water in. This bacteria needs moisture or water to live, and we package it in foil. This particular type of brick also needs air. This one will get more and more flavor with time and reaches peak in about 4 months, meaning full flavor. Years ago, people used to have us wax this one if they didn't like the strong smell or the strong flavor. So what we started doing in the 1960s is making this variety. This one stays in here rather than a week for 3 days. We still wash it every day, but then we vacuum pack it to cut the air off. It'll get more and more flavor with time, but it won't pick up the predominant odor or earthiness of the original type of brick cheese. There's a place for both of them out on the market. Another American original invented in Wisconsin in the 1870s that we make is Colby cheese, invented in the village of Colby, Wisconsin in the 1870s. It's very hard to find an authentic Colby. Most manufacturers that make cheddar make a mild cheddar and call it Colby. USDA had passed the law and changed the definition of Colby so that large manufacturers could do that. But an authentic Colby is a completely different cheese, and the way you could tell an authentic Colby is by the irregular openings in the piece of cheese itself. As you saw in the production of brick cheese, it starts out with adding cultures to ripen the milk, and then also rennet is added to coagulate, and it's cut. This is the basic start of all cheeses, but different bacteria are used. For instance, in our cheddar, we use different select cultures, a greater amount of the cultures, and in cheddar production, the cheese is allowed to mat out in the vat. We start out by ditching it, cutting it, and then we pile it. And this is called cheddaring. This is where cheddar got the name. As we pile it in the vat, and the cheese, you might say, smashes out, this is the time that the bacteria is continually reproducing lactic acid and working on the fats, the proteins, and the other compounds to produce the flavors of the cheese. After we have this cheese fully matted out, the only way to get it into the forms is to cut it and then mill it. After it is milled, we also do a step which in modern mechanization I think is often skipped, and that's washing the curd. We wash the curd to remove excess whey, because the whey carries lactose, which is a sugar. If you leave too much sugar in a cheddar that you're going to age out, which we do with our cheddars, the bacteria converts the lactose sugar into lactic acid, and if you have too much sugar present, you'll get a bitterness as the age comes onto the cheese. After we wash it, we salt it, put it in the forms, and that's when the aging process begins. Some of our cheeses we sell as mild, and we age them all the way up to 6 years old. I'd like to thank you all for joining all of us here at Widmers on this tour. And I hope this gives you all a better understanding and appreciation of the fine quality handcrafted cheeses we produce here at Widmers.